How many of you guys grew up on a farm? Anybody grew up on a farm with critters? How many of you guys still live on a farm? And when you grow up on a farm, at least in the way that I grew up, it was just common that you hunt animals and you eat animals, and sometimes you shoot animals not because you're going to eat them, because they're pesky. We shot groundhogs all the time for sport. It wasn't just to kill something for the fun of it. It was because of the holes they would dig in the hay fields, and then the tractors would drop off in the holes, and you could mess stuff up. So there was, we were always shooting crows, because they were always getting the corn, and so we were always shooting varmints. And so now I live in town, kind of, not in the city limits, but on the peripheral edges in a housing development where you really, you can't just go out and start shooting critters and stuff unless you go deep into the woods there, at least a little bit into the woods. However, in our neighborhood, we've developed a little pest problem up there. And we've seen these critters every once in a while, but not real often, till just several weeks ago. And several weeks ago, one of our neighbor's dogs got into it with a coon, and because the coon was very aggressive, and actually my understanding is the coon attacked the dog, which tells you there's something wrong right there, right? So little scenario that Dan and his family can relate to, and so the dog kills the coon, and they call the proper authorities to come up and get the coon, and the proper authority says, we've got to have this coon tested, but I can tell you now this coon is rabid. And they had been washing the dog off, had coon slobbers all over and everything, and now you all have to go to the hospital and start taking your rabies shots, because by the time we get the testing back on this coon, it's going to be too late, because you've got to go immediately, right? And so, wait and ask your husband when you get home. We'll be scriptural here. And so, that makes you a little paranoid, right? And so a couple of weeks ago, these big old coons started coming up in our backyard in the daytime, which is usually not a good sign, okay, because they're nocturnal creatures. And, we throw some scrap bread out for the birds and stuff, and try to feed the birds, and of course, that didn't help any because they found out there was a food source there. Then they're getting in all my bird feeders, and 4 or 5 days ago, there's a little landscaped island in my backyard, and there's a bunch of pampas grass growing up, and I walked around and I couldn't tell what was going on the backside until I walked around it. All I can tell is we've been out of town. I come home and this pole bird feeder that's got 2 bird feeders on it is leaning way over, and it's kind of rocking around and stuff. And I walk around and there's a coon pushing on my pole, knocking my bird feeder. Now, a few days before that, there was a concrete pagoda there right close to it, and the top was knocked off. And I couldn't figure out what in the world, there's no way the wind knocked this concrete pagoda top off. And then I finally started putting 2 together. The coons were getting on top of the pagoda, trying to reach out and grab the bird feeders, which they did. So this coon looks and sees me, right as I see him, and we both just kind of freeze. Because I'm thinking he's rabid, and he's probably just thinking he's bigger than me. And so we're just, I'm sure it wasn't more than 2 seconds, but it seemed more like about 30 seconds, and we're just like, so I'm going to start backing up real slow here, because I'm waiting on this thing to bare its teeth and just come at me, just going for my jugular. Because I don't know how high coons can jump or anything, but I know they can climb really well, and if they can climb a tree, they can climb me. And so, but then he takes off running, and this coon does what all the coons do in our backyard. They go under our back deck. That just seems to be where they always end up. So, I was talking to my neighbor on Memorial Day morning, and I said, "Are you guys having a coon problem over here?" And he said, "Oh, Scott, we don't know anything about the coons. They won't stay off our back porch, and they'll come up and they'll look through the back door in the middle of the day, and we'll scream at them and tell them to go away, and they just look at us and smile, and they're not afraid of us." And I'm putting all these pieces together, and I'm saying this is not good, because my daughter's out in the yard playing all the time, and if a wild coon comes running out of the bushes and grabs her, rabies it's much easier for a child to contract rabies than an adult, and it processes really, really fast in a young child. So I can think about this, I've got to guard my family, I don't know what to do, and so I told my neighbor, I said, well, I can take care of the coon problem as long as you guys don't have a problem with it. And she said, well, I'll do what you got to do. And I said, well, I'll start shooting them if you don't care. And so she said, no, please. And she said, I'll call you when they're on my back deck, and you can come shoot them off my back deck. I said, well, that's probably not a good idea at all right there. But they're in my backyard enough. And so it was just a couple hours later and, that evening in the house, and look out, and sure enough, there's a big old coon in the backyard. And so I go downstairs and I sneak out the side door, and the coon's down in the yard over the hill eating. And so I shoot the coon. The coon, of course, takes off running down to the woods. I can tell the coon was shot kind of like a deer. They run a little bit. And so then I put the gun up. I go get my shovel. It's like you wait a few minutes because there's only one thing worse than a rabid coon hiding in the bushes. And that's an injured rabid coon hiding in the bushes. And so I wait a while. I see there's a little blood trail. And I go down through the woods and I find the coon. And so I take my shovel. It's like I need to go bury this coon. And when I flip the coon over, she flips over on her back. And the first thing that becomes very obvious to me is that she had young. She obviously was in nursing season. And of course, as is human nature, though I felt like I was doing what I had to do, I felt so bad. Felt so bad because now there's some baby coon somewhere. But then, there's this rational side of my mind saying, well, but if she's rabid, the babies are rabid by now, and you just killed a whole bunch of birds with one stone, or coons with one bullet in this case. And so that's really a good thing. And so the rest of the night, I'm trying to talk myself, and I go in and I tell my wife, it was a female, it was a mama, she's nursing, it was obvious, and they're probably under our back deck. And when I took a shower, it's bothering me bad. I mean, I am a seasoned veteran hunter. I have killed dozens of deers. I've hunted my whole life. And this was just eating me up. And I get out of the shower, and I go and I look out the door, and sure enough, there's another big coon out there in the backyard. And I go, I'm not shooting another one, not until I find out what's going on here. And so I come and I get online, because I've never researched coons before. And I find out, it just so happens, there is one time that it's pretty common for coons to come out in the daytime. And it's nursing mamas, because they're not getting enough to eat. And so that they'll come out in the daytime scavenging for food, trying to keep their system going. And so while there has been rabid coons in our neighborhood, and what's the odds of there being just one rabid coon in a neighborhood, right? Logic saying it's okay, you still did the right thing. I'm telling you, I started feeling even guiltier when I realized, because I looked at the coon pretty close, and it was clear to me this coon was not rabid. I mean, she wasn't slobbering, she was not attacking me. It became clear that she was nursing, she was needing extra food, and now I'm feeling bad. And I call my wife, and she's, I'm trying to tell her how I'm feeling about it. And she's just like, you gotta let it go, you gotta let it go. You've done the right thing, just let it go. And say, I can't just let it go. Anyone ever told you that when you're feeling bad about something, just let it go? But easy for them to say. Yeah. And I'm telling you, all day yesterday, it's affected my appetite. That night, I could not sleep. I tossed and turned. I got up I went to bed at 11 o'clock. At 12:30, I was back up, just sitting there watching TV, trying to get it off my mind. It's like I was feeling so guilty. A small thing in the big scheme of life. But in the moment, it was really a huge thing for me. And the only way that it has become good is it's reminded me of the power of guilt. And that being a very small thing, that, you know what? Worst case scenario, it's a nursing mama coon. Again, worst case scenario, she's got 3 babies, they all starved to death. It's not like we don't have a hefty coon population out there without that family of coons, okay? There's plenty of coons to go around out there. It's in the big picture, not a big thing in the natural, but in the emotional picture, somehow it become a really big thing to me. But I began to realize that the Lord was trying to use this thing to remind me of something that is so huge in people's lives that if it isn't dealt with, that their life is at a standstill. How many of you guys know what it's like to deal with some guilt? Dealing with guilt. The first story, I'm not even going to read it. We know that, well, I will read it. Even though it's cliche at this point, for anyone who's been in church very long. Just in case there's a couple here that haven't been in church. Everyone knows about the first time that not just sin was introduced into creation, but guilt was introduced into creation, because they happened about the same time. It's the story of Adam and Eve, and God says, don't eat of that tree. They eat of that tree, right? And so in chapter 3 of Genesis, if I pick it up at verse 6, it says, and when the woman saw that the fruit of the tree was good for food and pleasing to the eye, and also desirable for gaining wisdom, she took some and ate it. She also gave some to her husband, who was with her, and he ate it. Then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they realized they were naked. So they sewed fig leaves together and made coverings for themselves. Now, if I stop right there and I back up to chapter 2, to verse 25, it says, the man and his wife were both naked and they felt no shame. You remember that part? But now there was no shame. There was no shame. Suddenly they noticed they're naked and they're ashamed. Of course, the word there is something much bigger than just shame, as we're going to find out. Both their eyes were open, they realized they were naked. So they sewed fig leaves together and made coverings for themselves. They tried to cover themselves. That's another picture of the law, by the way, trying to cover themselves. Then the man and his wife heard the sound of the Lord God as he was walking in the garden in the cool of the day, and they hid from the Lord God among the trees of the garden. But the Lord God called to the man, "Where are you?" And he answered, "I heard you in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, and so I hid." Is this the first time they were naked? They were always naked, right? Is this the first time they were ashamed? First time they were ashamed because they sinned, and they're not feeling all these emotions because they sinned. They're feeling all these emotions because of a consequence of sin called guilt. It's not the fact that they ate the tree within itself that now they're running and hiding from God. It's what they're feeling in response to doing something that they felt like they should not have done. They are feeling guilt, condemnation. They're beating themselves up for something. Have you noticed the effects that guilt can have on you physically, emotionally, relationally, all those things? In this situation, we have a story where it appears that Adam and Eve and God were walking together in the cool of the day. They were spending intimate time together. They were feeling good about themselves. They were feeling good about God. They were feeling good about life. They were walking in dominion power. It was great. Life was great. But as soon as they start battling guilt, every single thing in their world changed. Now they're hiding from God. They don't feel good about their own bodies suddenly. They hate themselves. And they're trying to camouflage themselves. They're ashamed. They're ashamed because they've done something. But the shame is just a tributary flowing out of the river of guilt. The effects of guilt are incredible. If we put some modern day lingo on what we observe in the story, we can see how that guilt can affect someone's self-esteem. Suddenly, Adam and Eve don't feel real good about themselves. Guilt will affect your self-esteem maybe more than any single thing that is being processed through your emotions. It affects your attitude in life. You notice that guilt becomes a filter? It becomes a filter, doesn't it? In all your interactions, all your socialization, everything that's going on, it's passing through that filter now. On your job, in your marriage, with your children, with friends, with family. Suddenly it becomes a filter and everything is being passed to that. Your attitudes, your socialization, your decision making, your whole countenance changes. Maybe you guys have ever noticed the countenance of a person who's battling guilt. Just a really down countenance. Even in their physical features, the head down and bowed over, and it becomes very obvious this is a person that doesn't feel good about themselves. Battling guilt. It flows into those natural realms where it affects your appetite, it affects your sleep patterns, and it just affects everything. And now everything's feeding each other because everyone knows that when you're not eating, you're not sleeping, now it's being returned back in the other direction. It's now complicating everything, and it's a mess. It's a mess. It becomes a self-feeding monster, and it doesn't always just go away. And sometimes many years later, it gets worse and worse and worse and worse. Let's talk about some of the things that can cause the guilt that I'm talking about. What in your all's experience, what are some of the things that you have personally experienced or seen in others close to you that has caused a great deal of guilt in somebody's life? anger, but why did they get angry? So just feeling guilty because they got angry. Okay, and how they handled the anger, lost a temper, flew off the handle, said some things they shouldn't have said, hit some things they shouldn't have hit. You disappointed somebody, let somebody down, broke a vow, didn't keep your word, told someone, I'll be there, you can count on me. Does anybody know why Peter was kind of in hiding after he denied Christ 3 times? Yeah, he's feeling guilty now because he made a vow. He said, man, Jesus, the rest of them may cut and run. I'll never leave you, and you can count on me. And he wasn't there, and now he's battling incredible guilt. Reckon there was any of that in play when Judas hung himself? Because we don't really know what was going on with Judas, but there's more in favor of the idea that Judas thought he was forcing something to happen here that ultimately would be a good thing. He just didn't handle it right. Now he's feeling guilty because his friend has been crucified. And it's his fault. Can you imagine the guilt you would carry if you accidentally killed somebody? And I'm not saying intentionally. It could happen if you intentionally kill somebody too. But that should be a given. But with some people, maybe it's enough. I've known people who has been involved in manslaughter situations, and it was very much involuntary, where it truly was an accident. And maybe they were just trying to stuff Cheetos in their face while they were driving down the road, and some kid runs out to get a ball, and bam, they run over a child. The child is dead, and now they're having to live with that the rest of their life. I knew a lady very close to our family that happened to. She looked down the floor for a second. A kid come out of nowhere, out of a yard on a bicycle. She hit the child, killed the child, and for years and years she lived with that guilt. What else? Guilt of addiction. What addiction is doing to a family. What addiction is doing to yourself. Even more so, hidden addictions that nobody knows about, and you're doing a pretty good job hiding it, but the guilt is eating you up. What about any hidden sin? Any hidden sin. The guilt of any hidden sin. Yeah. That's what Adam's trying to do. He's trying to hide his sin. He's hiding from God. He's trying to hide his sin. What else? Parents face a lot of guilt concerning children. Hollering at children, being in a bad mood, taking it out on your kid and then feeling bad later. There's times that I holler at Hannah when she deserves to be hollered at, and I still feel guilty about it. There's times that she'll go to bed at night and we didn't end the night on the best note, and I just want to go wake her up 2 hours later and say, baby, Daddy just wants you to know I love you. And there's nights, because she always falls asleep in our bed, and when I come to bed, I carry her to her bed almost every single night. And there's many nights I'll tuck her in, I'll kiss her little chubby cheek and say, Daddy loves you. I sure hope you're hearing this. Daddy loves you. Because I'm feeling guilty and I'm trying to make myself feel better. Now she's 7. It was out of her mind 5 minutes after it happened probably. Because I say, baby, Daddy's sorry. Because I apologize to her when I know I'm wrong. She'll say, that's okay, Daddy. Because it takes a lot to offend a 7-year-old and stick in her craw. You know what I'm saying? It's not even about her. I'm trying to make myself feel better. How about moms who feel guilty because they've had children, but there has to be a second breadwinner in the family now. They're having to go off to work and they're leaving their kids at daycare or something. Right. There are some moms who feel really, really guilty about that. Guilt concerning things in the marriage. People who've been through prior marriages, battling guilt many years later because of things that happened. Could have I done things different? Did I handle it right? All kinds of guilt with relationships, ethical issues, moral issues, things that go on at work, things that people do. Well, it starts with 1 paper clip, and now it's moved on to 10 paper clips, and now it's the cabinet that holds the paper clips, and guilt. You can't sleep, you can't eat, you're grouchy, you're in a bad mood, you're not pleasant to be around, no one wants to be around you because you're in a funk. It's like, what's wrong with you? Well, nothing, I'm fine. Well, it's hard for people to talk about their guilt. In fact, it's probably one of the single hardest things for people to talk about is their guilt. All kinds of failures in life that we feel guilty about. Not pursuing our dreams. Spiritual failures, responsibility failures. The list goes on and on and on. Things that happen that we feel guilty about because we should have done something different, but we didn't, and now it's too late, and now we're left with just our guilt. Guilt. I want you to know there's two kinds of guilt, though. Before we talk about type 2, there is two types of guilt. We think of guilt just being bad, but there's two types of guilt. And counselors call it healthy and unhealthy guilt, or appropriate and inappropriate guilt. Guilt can be good in the fact that guilt is one of our primary moral compasses in life. It's from feeling guilt when we don't do something right or we do something wrong that becomes a deterrent in life. How many of you guys can remember as children doing things you shouldn't have done and then battling the guilt, even as a child, telling a lie and feeling guilty? And believe it or not, some children will come and fess up because they've got to come clean. Because even as a child, the emotions can just be haunting. And so we learn through life at a very young age that guilt is a deterrent in life. It becomes a moral compass. There are many, many things probably that you and I do not do simply because we don't want to feel guilty. And we know if we do that, we're going to feel guilty. And so when we do something that makes us feel guilty, it is a reminder not to do that again. Not to handle it that way again. Better to not make a vow than to make a vow and break it. Because if I make a vow and break it, then I got to process all this guilt again. And it doesn't always go away real quick. But there's healthy and unhealthy guilt. Even a biblical term that saddles up with guilt, condemnation, even in the Bible, condemnation can be seen as a positive or a negative thing. The Bible clearly shows us the downside, the negative side of guilt, shame, and condemnation. But the Bible also lets us know that our heart condemns us because of things that we know need to be corrected in our life. And so what the Bible is saying is condemnation, guilt, does become a moral compass. We are supposed to learn lessons from that, and we're supposed to alter our behavior based on the guilt that we have battled before. But of course, what I primarily want to address tonight is the unhealthy guilt, the inappropriate guilt. Unhealthy guilt means it's a guilt that's destroying you. It's destroying you emotionally, mentally, spiritually, physically, relationally, maritally, parentally. Every area of life, it's destroying you. It's unhealthy. It's got major trickle-down effects. It's called also inappropriate guilt because a lot of guilt, in fact, more guilt than not, is guilt that does not have to remain in somebody if they would just address it appropriately. Because if it's an inappropriate guilt, if we address it appropriately, now that unhealthy guilt can turn into healthy guilt, and now it becomes a moral compass in our life instead of this weight that's just dragging us down. How many of you guys saw that little picture that I posted on Facebook advertising tonight? You got a man, he's got this weight on his shoulder, and it's the word guilt, of course, and he's just bowed over in life and trying to carry the weight of that thing. The reality is, no matter what the source of your guilt is, God has put systems in place in the natural and the spiritual where if we would deal with it correctly, that unhealthy guilt becomes a very valuable thing in our life. And I want to show you just 5 easy things tonight. 5 steps, if you will. 5 stages. I want to show you in order. Jesus came preaching the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Kingdom synonymous with government. Government synonymous with order. Very important. I want you to get these things. I want you all to get what Jesus was talking about, okay? Jesus preaching, kingdom of heaven's at hand. Kingdom of God's at hand. He's saying, I've come to reinstill order in life. And it's the reminder that if we will get order in how we handle things, day 1 of creation, day 2 of creation, day 1 sets the stage for day 2. Day 2 sets the stage for day 3. If we get the sequence out of order, then nothing happens. There's not a Garden of Eden at the end of it. There's just more chaos, okay? It's all discombobulated still. But if we get things in order, then it's amazing how we can bring healing and restoration to everything in life. And guilt is not an exception. And I want to show you a pattern, a sequence, a way of processing and handling guilt, that if you will do this, there's no excuse for any human being on the planet to not be able to take whatever that guilt is, no matter what caused it, and turn it into something very positive in their life, and probably everybody around them too. Alright? Dealing with guilt. First thing, simple, but it's a biggie. You've got to recognize which type of guilt you're dealing with. Is it healthy guilt, or is it unhealthy guilt? Did you just holler at your kid before everybody went to bed, and now you're feeling guilty? It's not a big deal. Let it become a moral compass. Remember tomorrow night. Don't do it that way again. Okay? Not everything that makes you feel guilty requires 6 months of counseling. You understand?
Yeah.
More things than not that cause guilt are things that instantly should be able to be turned into something healthy, because now we're going to remember. We're going to remember. We're going to remember. So what kind of guilt are we dealing with? Now, for everyone sitting here tonight, and anyone watching by way of the internet, if you're dealing with something that's been going on for a long time, this has been going on for many, many weeks into many months, sometimes into many years, then we know right up front this is unhealthy guilt. This is not good. On any level, this is not good. And it's destructive in ways that you probably don't even know how to see. So you've got to recognize the type of guilt. So we're assuming that if there's anyone here tonight that's really dealing with the issue of guilt, it's unhealthy guilt, right? So I bet if I ask you what you think the next step of dealing with unhealthy guilt would be, I bet you there'd be at least 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6, or 7, or 8 people here that could guess what the obvious next step has to be when you're dealing with guilt. Anyone want to make a stab? Well, we've identified the guilt. It's unhealthy. And we're assuming, now in most cases we're assuming that we know what the guilt is coming from, okay? I don't think there's too many cases where people just say, well, I just feel guilty all the time, and I don't know why. I'd say that that's probably a person that's not battling guilt. That's probably someone battling some type of insanity, to be very honest with you. Or a chemical disorder in their body or something. And I know that's funny to you, insanity's funny, but the rest of us think it's a very serious situation. In fact, I think only an insane person would have even laughed. Still talking to Kessie Morgan, for those of you at home that can't see Morgan. I just want to make sure our internet family is up to speed with what's going on in here tonight.
Stop doing it.
Stop doing it.
Forgive yourself.
Forgive yourself. Okay.
That's prayer.
All right. Got to identify your guilt. Second thing you got to do, you got to make amends for it. Got to make amends. Most times, and I'm telling you, this is an order. This is an order, and it has to be this order 9 times out of 10. If you're feeling incredible guilt, that guilt will go no place until you make some kind of amends for it. And we're going to talk about that today, because that's easier said than done in some situations. And you guys know that Jesus taught concerning our prayer life that we need to forgive so we'll be forgiven. Can I give you some context for those of you who've been going to church for 30 years and never was sure how to slide that thing into the new covenant? Because let's face it, that doesn't jive with the new covenant, does it? He'll only forgive me if I forgive others. Well, I thought the cross was enough. Well, it is. There's context to everything. And the context is dealing with what Jesus came to primarily deal with in life. It wasn't sin. It was the condemnation because of sin. You see, sin had always been around. Sin's always going to be around. What was separating man from God was not the sin, but the condemnation and the guilt that came from sin. Adam was the original picture of all humanity. It wasn't the fact that Adam did something he was told not to do. The fact that when he did something he was told not to do, he felt guilty, condemned, and he ran from God, which is the opposite of what God's trying to accomplish, because he's built man to be his companion. And if man's running from him and hiding from him, how is this plan going to work? We see the same story with Zacchaeus. Jesus comes to town, Zacchaeus is a chief tax collector. He has turned his back on his own people to work for the enemy, Rome, and steal money from his own bloodline even. He's feeling guilty, so when Jesus, this supposed Messiah, comes to town, he's doing the same thing Adam's doing. He's up in the fig leaves, and he's hiding from Jesus because of his guilt. And so Jesus says, come down from there. He didn't say, stop doing what you're doing first. He just said, come down. I want to hang out with you today. Who you are, where you're at today, I want to hang out with you right now. See, the problem in man isn't, first of all, his sin. The big problem with man is the condemnation and guilt that's associated with it. And so, even secular counselors understand that when you're battling great guilt, that until you, first of all, identify this is an unhealthy thing in my life, and I know where it stems from, until I do something to make some kind of amend for this thing, I'm not going to be able to do anything with it. Now, in some situations that's not that hard. In some situations it's almost impossible, right? If you're feeling guilty because you've done something wrong, and listen, we're quick to talk about the things that people do to us that are wrong. But we're not so quick to talk about the things that we do to other people that are wrong. When everyone talks about us, we're upset about it. But most of us spend half our life talking about other people, and we don't seem to feel real bad about that. You know what I'm saying? If we've done something to somebody who's alive on planet Earth, and they're not institutionalized somewhere where we can't get to them, there's always the possibility of making amends, right? Making amends, by the way, doesn't mean we have to have the combination of me saying I'm sorry and them saying I accept your apology. Me making an amend can carry no responsibility for their response of my amendment. You see what I'm saying? I have to do what I've got to do. Whether they accept it, receive it, throw it back in my face, cuss me out, or whatever, that has very little to do. In other words, me having my guilt relieved can't hinge upon somebody saying, I forgive you. Oh, thank God I can sleep. No, it's a deep psyche issue to the secular society, a deep spiritual issue to we, the church, where there's just something we have to do on our end. We've got to do it. We've got to do it. We've got to take care of something here. Until we do what we know we've got to do, I have to go tell this person I am sorry for what I did. Whether it's my child, whether it's a spouse, whether it's someone who used to be my friend or is still my friend, someone I used to work with, a boss that I stole from, someone I went to church with, a pastor who did someone in the church dirty, someone in the church who did a pastor dirty. The list goes on and on, things that are very relatable to us. And in those situations, unless we make amends, we don't find release. Amends, sometimes the best thing to do is to go to that person and say, I want you to know I was wrong. I want you to know when you find the guts to humble yourself and say, I was wrong. I'm telling you, something happens. Something supernatural happens when we take ownership of wronging somebody. Now, I know we're artists about being in denial. We're artists about justification. We're artists about saying, well, but they did this and they did. If they would have done that, I wouldn't have done this. And yeah, we're wrestling with our guilt. Somehow justifying doesn't make guilt go away, does it? Somehow blame shifting, passing the buck, doesn't make guilt go away. Excusing it, understanding it, nothing seems to be making my guilt go away. Making amends for our guilt. Sometimes the best thing to do is go and talk to somebody, and sometimes the best way to approach it is not going and talking to somebody, writing a letter. Because sometimes it's a situation where it's not proved, and it's not even productive or fruitful. It's too awkward of a situation. It's a thing where you used to be in a relationship, but now they're in a relationship, and you're in a relationship over here, and now it's just not prudent to try to have it set down. Sometimes writing letters is the best way. Sometimes you can't go make amends because the person's dead. They're gone. How many has ever heard of writing letters and taking them to the graveyard and reading them. You ever heard of that before? It's common in secular counseling when somebody's battling guilt, but now it's too late, that person is gone. And so the common approach is you write out everything you're feeling and you take it to the graveyard and you read the letter. And I'm telling you, if you don't think that more times than not there's a release, you're crazy. Because there is almost always some kind of release that takes place. Just so something, as we know as Christians, very powerful about the words, that when we speak them, when we write them, when we declare them, there's something very powerful about that. And even when we're talking to someone that's already gone, but by faith we believe somehow this release matters. And Dad, I'm going to talk to you. I hope you're hearing. I hope you're listening. Because there's some things I've got to say. There's something about us speaking it releases it. It's a very spiritual thing, and it releases us from a lot of prison cells. Making amends. Sometimes making amends is more than words. Sometimes amends is paying somebody back what you stole. Fixing something that you broke. Returning that lawnmower that you never did return, but now you've used it for 10 years. What's the point? You need to go buy him a new lawnmower. Yeah. You're going to have to use these little simple examples to kickstart your own thinking. If you're battling guilt, what happened? What caused the guilt? Who else was involved? Because there's always somebody else involved. Sometimes it's not even a person, it's a coon. I told my wife, I said, that's it. I said, I know that other coon out in the yard right now is a mama because she's out in the daytime too. She keeps carrying this stuff under the deck. I guarantee there's a nest of baby coons under our deck. Don't know if they're rabid or not, but I'm going to feed these coons like crazy. Years ago. It's funny. It's human nature, by the way, have you noticed, to want to make amends. But we're scared to because we're afraid we don't know what will happen. We can't predict the response on the other end, so we're afraid to. Or sometimes we're too prideful, or we just don't know how to. I had a similar situation as this coon scenario several years ago, living out on the farm, and loved hunting, but was primarily a deer hunter, but there was a lot of turkeys starting to show up, and I never really was that interested in turkey hunting, but I decided one year, well, I'm going to go turkey hunting. So I'm back there on the back of our farm, and here comes a turkey, and so I shoot the turkey. And the turkey's laying there flopping around, and the turkey's not dead. But you know, if you want to eat the turkey, you're just not going to blast the thing with a shotgun again. You've already got pelts you got to pick out. You don't want more. So I run up and I put my foot on this turkey, and I don't know what to do. And this turkey just, got that one eyeball. Just look, I can see my reflection in this turkey's eyeball. And I don't know what to do with this turkey. It's just like, how am I going to kill this turkey? How am I going to finish this turkey off? And I've told this story before, and it may sound silly to you, but you had to be there, and you had to be in my skin. I didn't know what to do with this turkey, and so I took this turkey around the neck, and I strangled this turkey. And I watched the light leave this turkey. As I was strangling, it's just like I'm watching my reflection. This turkey I'm the last thing this turkey sees in this lifetime. I'm telling you, I couldn't even eat that bird. I felt so guilty, and as my wife, and God's my witness, I went to southern states, and I bought a 100-pound bag of cracked corn, and I took it to the woods, and I spread it all over the woods to feed the remaining turkeys. I was trying to make amends for my sins so I could sleep again. Now, it wasn't about killing the turkey, it was about the way that I killed the turkey. It's not natural to take something's life with your bare hands, is what I took from that, by the way. Shooting them with a gun, sure, that's natural. But I got to think later, and then I was telling one of my friends the story. He said, oh yeah, I had that problem once, and I just carried the turkey. It was flopping around. I carried it back to my truck, and I stuck the head, opened the door and stuck the head there and started sleeping. And I'm going, you're talking about not sleeping for 2 years. I'd never be able to open that truck door and get in there again. I'd see that turkey's head in there every time I got. My point is, with this silly story, it's just innate in us a strong desire to make amends when we are battling guilt, because we hate ourselves. We don't even like who we've become. We're tired of hiding in the leaves. We're tired of running from God. We're tired of having just a sick relationship in our marriage and with our kids and on our job and with our people we go to church with. It's just, we're sick of it. And there's something in us driving. There's someone in us that's driving us. Make amends. Make amends. Make amends. Make amends. It's not about God forgiving us. It's about something bigger than that we're going to get to. Make amends when possible. When possible. And I want you to know, in every situation, you may have to get a little creative, but there is a way to make amends in every situation. Like I said, even if the person is gone and you can't talk to them physically, even if it's something that happened on your job many years ago, and in that place, it's not even the same people that works there, there's still a way to go to that place you used to work, find whoever's in charge and say, "Hi, I'm John Smith, and I worked here 12 years ago, and I just want to tell you what happened when I worked here, and I just want to tell you that, and whatever your response is, I'm willing to accept that, whatever the case may be." There's always a way. You may have to get creative. If you can't find a way, find someone that can help you be creative. I can try to help come up with some ideas. You may not always like my ideas, but sometimes it's easier to get ideas from someone who's not in that emotional place. Come up with an idea, okay? Make amends, make amends. Step 3 in this order, okay? This is very important, very important. First one, recognize and identify the type of guilt. Second of all, make amends. Third step, you've got to accept your failure. You've got to accept your failure. You've got to accept your failure. How many's ever heard me tell you over and over the years, failure is something we do. It's not who we are. That's not original, by the way. I stole that. Failure, but that's not how we act. That's not how we really feel sometimes. How many of you have ever said, or at least heard somebody say, "I'm such a failure"? Well, why do you feel like such a failure? And then they tell you about their failure. But they're telling you about something they did. If our identity is found in failure, then who is not a failure? Did you guys say that Jesus was quite the success state? Y'all do know he was the biggest sinner in creation, right? He sinned more than me, you, and all of us combined. And everyone that's ever been born and ever will be born. He took all the sins of creation upon himself. Okay? Does that taint you in his mind, or do you still see him as a success? Do you see that as his identity? Or do we see that as the work of the cross, something he did? See, everybody has failures. Failure is not an identity. And failure is not who we are. Failure is something we did. And it's something we feel bad about now. It's something we wish we could go back and do over. And all we can say is welcome to the human race. Some failures we don't feel a lot of guilt about. Some failures we do. Those are the ones we're talking about. You've got to accept what you did. It may not have been good. If it was stupid, then just say, "That was the stupidest thing I've ever done." It's not a bad confession. It's a truth. If it was stupid, it was stupid. I'm not saying sugarcoat it and say, "Well, yeah, you're not a bad person, ease up on yourself. It's not a big deal. I'm sure they had it coming." No. I've done some really stupid things in my life. Stupid things. Things that I couldn't believe I did. It's like, I can't believe I did that. Said things to people, hurt people. And it's like, I can't believe I said that. And I can't believe I did that to them. I can't believe I failed them like that. So you go and you make amends the best way you can. And then you just have to admit, I did it. I failed. And you've got to accept it. Accept that you failed, but you're not a failure. Fourth step is the step that God's trying to get us to. Just learn from it. Learn from it. We know the cliche when it comes to success and failure. For every success, there's dozens of failures, right? No matter whose life we look at. I love the stories of guys like Mr. Macy. How many's ever been to Macy's in New York, the big one? You've been to the ones in the mall, you haven't seen anything. The one in New York City is incredible. The dude went bankrupt 4 times before the store finally made it. Mr. Coca-Cola's first year in business sold 50 Cokes, and everybody said, no one's going to drink this stuff. Say, did this not prove to you that no one's going to buy this? How many times? Now everyone's unsure of how many times the light bulb actually failed before it was a success. It started out dozens, then it went hundreds, and now it's thousands of times. I don't even really know anymore. It was a whole bunch. We know that in life. In sports, in business. Anyone here as a parent ever get it right the first time you did anything? How many did a perfect job changing your first diaper? Lord, I'm telling you, the first diaper I put on Hannah, she'd have had less poop on her if I wouldn't have diapered her at all. Because it redirected it, and it created a dam effect where instead of just, coming out even, it pushed it in little pockets, and then it squirted up her back, and then it's down to her hair, it's squirting down this leg, it's between her toes. You ever tried to clean poop out from between a baby's toes? You got to get like a Q-tip down in there. It's like, that's because I didn't know how to diaper very well. By the time it was over, I was doing a pretty good job diapering. Many failures led to me becoming a successful diaperer. And that's the story of all of our lives, isn't it? We've got to learn from our mistakes. Every one of us in here has hurt people. We have damaged people. We have crushed people. We've been very unfair to people. Things we've said, things we've done. We've not kept our word. We've broken vows. We've justified it, but then we've had to live with guilt, and we knew can't justify it. It's not them, or I wouldn't feel so guilty. We've just got to take ownership of these things. Make amends for it. Admit to err is human. To fail is human. To do wrong things to good people is human. But you've got to learn from it. You've got to learn from it. And last of all is when we find real context in the Lord's Prayer. That you've got to forgive so you can be forgiven. And the hardest person to forgive is yourself. You see, forgiving ourselves. Doesn't matter how much we believe the Bible is true concerning the work of the cross. If we're feeling guilty about something, it means we have not forgiven ourselves of something. Okay? Spiritually, it's done. Jesus forgave us. It's gone. It doesn't even exist. We're having to remind Him even what's going on here. But we haven't forgiven ourselves. Guilt and condemnation is never a reflection of the heart of God. It's a reflection of the heart of man. And so we've got to look at our guilt. We've got to define it. This is unhealthy. This is inappropriate. It happened because of this, and now I've got to deal with it. I've got to take ownership of it. I'm tired of not eating. I'm tired of not sleeping. I'm tired of being grouchy. I'm going to make amends for this. I'm going to go to these people. I'm going to go to this place. I'm going to do something here to release myself from this prison and make amends. And I'm going to accept to err is human. Everybody makes mistakes. I'm not going to ask anybody in here how many of you guys have been through broken marriages, because today in any group of people there would be multiple hands. More hands would go up than none. What does that mean? It means we had a failed marriage. We had a failed marriage. There's more failed marriages out there that has existed than not existed. It's always easy to say it was the other person, and the reality is it was the other person. And you. It takes two, and it's very common to walk away from broken marriages battling some guilt. But you know what? That's life. People meet, fall in love, get married, or they don't fall in love and they still get married, and it doesn't end up the way that anybody thought or planned, and now people are doing things that aren't right. They're saying things they shouldn't say. People are getting hurt. People are making decisions out of emotions, whatever the case may be. And for every one of those situations, there's probably at least one situation where it was never going to work. And it probably had no choice but to end the way it did, especially when there is non-believers or a non-believer involved. What are you supposed to do with that? God invented marriage. If God's not involved in your marriage, how's a marriage supposed to work? Right? But if we walk away with that and we're carrying guilt because of something, what do? We just try to live with it and let it affect now all the good things God is doing in our life? Affect current relationships, a current job, current ministry, a current walk with God? Or is there a chance that God has given us the ability to do something about it? He's given us the ability to do something about it, hasn't he? Listen to this in Hebrews 9:14. I want to close with this passage. There's a bunch of them we could have pulled out that talk about this, especially in Hebrews. In fact, Hebrews chapters 9 and 10, I'm telling you, the writer, Paul or whoever it is really working this patch of the soil here. Because he's talking about, Hebrews is dealing with the cutting of the new covenant in a way where Hebrew people could understand. Taking it through that filter of Hebrew customs, with the priestly duties and the tabernacle, using all that imagery that they could relate to. And he's using that to explain Jesus and the work of the cross to them. And in chapters 9 and 10, he's trying to explain to them, and all this took place for one primary reason. The blood of the Lamb was for one primary reason, to relieve us of our guilt and our condemnation. He deals with that, and I like this verse in verse 14 of chapter 9. It says, how much more? Let me back up a little bit. Verse 13 says, the blood of goats and bulls and the ashes of a heifer sprinkled on those who are ceremonially unclean sanctify them so that they are outwardly clean. But how much more then will the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself unblemished to God, cleanse our consciences from acts that lead to death so that we may serve the living God? And I like this because a guilty conscience is going to interfere with a lot of things in life, especially your walk with God. He says this is very important that you allow Jesus Christ to help get your conscience clean, clear. Relieve yourself of that because it leads to acts of death. Acts of death in your marriage, with your kids, on your job, your own mental health, your own physical health. It leads to acts of death. He said we need to take care of this so that you can serve God. He's making it so simple and so tangible. He says, you've got to have your conscience cleansed so you can serve God. Because if you don't get your conscience cleansed, you're going to hide from God. You're going to run from God. When you hear God come in, and I, the way I've seen this play out so many times, I've watched people come into this church right here, us be in the middle of praise and worship, God's presence begins to stir a little bit, begins to manifest, and I watch people leave the room. Many Sundays. Oh, suddenly they're having a pee-pee attack. Something's going on. Getting a leg cramp. Got to go stretch my leg. No. God's showing up. It's getting uncomfortable. They're battling guilt. And the human psyche kicks in. And it's that Adam garden scenario all over again. I hear the sounds of God. I've got to run. I've got to hide. You start preaching and the corporate anointing shows up and begins to pull on people's hearts and people get up and they leave. It's incredible to me through the years how many people I've seen get up and walk out as soon as I start giving an altar call. Because now we're going to have an encounter with God. I can't have an encounter with God. Guilt, man. Guilt will destroy your life. I want you to know something. I relate to you in your guilt. I've experienced guilt on multiple levels through the years. Different types of relationships, things that I've done on jobs that I should not have done. I've stolen, I've lied, I've cheated. I've broke vows, I've made promises I didn't keep. I've shot Mama Coons. I've done all kinds of things to induce guilt into my life. I relate to it. I know what it's like. I know what it's like to be in that prison. But I have to remind you tonight that dealing with guilt is your responsibility. Yours, 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 yours. And God has given you all the tools you need to deal with it. Starting with the work of the cross, all the way down to the simple principles that Jesus himself even gave us. Have aught against your brother, you've got to go talk to him about it. Don't let the sun go down on your anger. Deal with it. Why? Because it's going to become a root. It's going to become bitterness, or it's going to become guilt. It's going to turn into something ugly. From the deep spiritual insights all the way to the tangibles, the surface tangibles, the Bible gives us every single thing we need to deal with guilt and set ourselves free. Get our consciences cleansed so that we can serve God. And so we can be good husbands, good wives, good mommies, good daddies, good bosses, good workers on our jobs, good church folks. You got to take ownership of it. Now,